welcome back. Climate change is a tremendous topic with seemingly there were so many perspectives to really look into this topic. But behind all of it, there is science. And we always need to look to science to move in any direction because it needs to be in the right direction. We need to base that on science. So scientific researchers working in a whole slew of fields, so all around the world, you provide critical information that we need to understand this reality of what's happening. So not everybody listens to science, but this is what we need to do. So for our final session here today in this broadcast, we are very pleased to bring in two scientists here, or bring outside this base camp here, to offer your perspectives and help us understand the latest climate-related research in the areas of your expertise. Mariah Seater, you're Arctic Basecamp polar scientist in residence, and you're also doctoral candidate at Tulane University. Wonderful to have you here. You're used to this temperature. You're dressed well.
Yes, I am.
This is your base. And also next to you is Dr. James Grecian, Arctic Basecamp scientist in residence. You're a marine ecologist and data scientist.
Yeah, that's right.
Wonderful to have both of you here. We're actually guests at your place, so we should be very thankful to be able to be here. We are indeed. So, Dr. James, to start us off, your perspective on a summary of your background, and then I'm going to turn to you, Mariah, in your area of research. Tell the audience, please, what do you work with?
So I'm a marine ecologist, and my specialism is with large marine vertebrates, we'd call them. So seabirds, seals, whales, and I use the latest kind of tracking technology to look at their movements around the planet to understand the places they go, what they're doing when they get there, and the food that they're eating. And then I'm trying to understand how the ecosystems are changing, and then as a result of that change, what might happen to those populations.
That must be a wonderful line of work. I can see all sorts of people just going,
It's really interesting.
Of envy, of course.
So I'm quite lucky that we get to go to some amazing places.
I can imagine.
I've been to the Arctic recently, and then the last 2 winters I've spent in Antarctica studying snow petrels that breed down there. So been to some brilliant places.
Thank you. And Mariah, your field of research, please.
Yep, I'm Mariah Seater, and
Mariah, not Maria.
Yeah.
It's tricky sometimes with the spelling.
It is. I'm from Alaska, and I am not a climate scientist by any means, but I had to become aware out of necessity. I'm a public health researcher, and all of the information we're finding across the Arctic, especially in indigenous communities, climate was intersecting everywhere we looked in our data. So I had to become very intimate with the climate crisis, with climate science, and integrate it in public health so we can make sure our populations and communities are healthier.
So Maria, what you're saying here is it's really you came from sort of from a personal level into this. Can you tell us a bit about your background that made you take this step?
Absolutely. So having grown up in Alaska, I've seen the climate change in my own backyard. This Christmas, we had grass. That was just...
In Alaska?
Yes, in Alaska. That's never happened in my lifetime there. So having been trained in public health, thinking about communities, thinking about the things that impact our health, and climate is one of those things. And I'm really here to de-silo climate science and public health to make sure that we can be healthier in the future.
So, in terms of how this affected your career, you stepped in. It's still Mariah. So, how did you step into this field, and what do you have a special focus area?
Yeah, I come at this at a policy angle. I'm really interested in making sure that we can get scientists.
Policy angel.
Angle.
I thought you said angel.
Well, I mean,
policy angel, but that's a new framing of things.
I mean, we're on the mountaintops. Why not? No, from policy, because we know that science needs to be translated as well to change policy and to make sure that our communities have what they need from the science perspective, and then making sure that our public health practitioners on the ground can have what they need as well.
So, Mariah, what can you tell us about the intersection between climate and public health here?
Yeah, so what we're finding more and more that it's impacting communities at the individual level. So in public health, we think about things from the individual level, the community, societal, and then kind of globally. So we know that's going all the way down to the individual. So impacting things like mental health. Right now in Alaska, our climate is changing, resources are changing, our seasons are changing. So it's impacting how people work, play, go to school, and it's having huge mental implications. And we need to be having those conversations.
Does it also affect the food patterns, the eating patterns?
Absolutely, absolutely. How they can access it, when they can access it, if they can at all. Yeah, absolutely.
And how is your work being received?
Well, that's a great question. I think we are speaking to people most of the time that understand the science, but I think we need to really push ourselves in the public health space to really, again, de-silo and reach people who may not be on board quite yet, the people that we can move. And that just is showing up, talking to policymakers, and making sure that everyone can have a seat at the table.
Thank you very much, Mariah. So turning to you, James, as a marine ecologist, what has your research so far told you, and what can you tell us about how the climate change is affecting the ecosystems?
Sure. So you said that it's really amazing that we can travel and look at these kind of cute animals, you might say, but really they're the top of many ecosystems. So when ecosystems are in trouble, the animals that are at the top of those ecosystems are the ones that we can see struggling. So, for example, we went up to the Arctic to track the migration of harp seals a few years ago, and they're in an area that's undergoing rapid climate change at the moment, where the breeding grounds are essentially melting out from underneath the mums when they're giving birth to their pups.
dear.
And so in years when we've got poor ice, the pups all drown, and so we get no more seals going into the population that year. And those kind of things are happening more and more in the Arctic. We're also seeing that the areas that they're using are changing. So the northern Barents Sea up in the Arctic Circle, that's changing massively with cold water species really struggling and a lot of warm water species moving in. And that ecosystem changes so much that the seals then struggle to find food. So we're then seeing mothers that don't have enough body condition to have successful pregnancies. So we're really seeing struggles in that population. But on the upside, we can also go places like Antarctica, where we've got snow petrels that travel all around the pack ice and forage. And then when they come back to the breeding colonies, they give that food to their chicks. But sometimes they're a bit messy, or sometimes they vomit that food if they're being attacked. And that vomit will accrete around the nest sites. And because Antarctica, at least for now, is so cold and so dry, this builds up over time. So we have these amazing records of the changes in the diet of the snow petrels over tens of thousands of years.
So you
And
can
that-
desiccate the vomit, basically.
Yep. Yeah. So it becomes almost like a rock. So we can core it, we can measure different elements in it and try and understand what the animals have been feeding. And of course, if you go back far enough through Antarctic history, you'll find periods of time when the temperature was much warmer. So we can use that as an analog to try and understand what the snow petrels might have been feeding on then, and so how the ecosystem may change in the future.
2024 was the warmest year on record, and we had previous years being the warmest. It just keeps going. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this temperature rise and what we can expect from your different perspectives in the coming years here. I'll stay with you, James.
So the problems that we're facing are only going to be magnified. The risks that we see, the challenges that these animals are facing, the challenges that ecosystems face will only be magnified as we increase the global temperature. What we need to do is to try and reduce the amount of change that we see. We're seeing, as I said, the borealization of the Arctic, so we're seeing warm temperature species moving in. We're seeing similar things with trends of movement of those same prey species in the Southern Ocean. So we're seeing animals that should be much further north starting to encroach. Things like squid are starting to do really well in the Southern Ocean when previously they wouldn't be such high populations. And that changes what food's available for predators, and so some of them will start to really struggle.
So, James, in terms of your findings here, how are they being received, and how can they reach and affect policymakers?
So what we've seen this week, which has been fascinating, is the move that industry is starting to make towards net zero carbon. That's fantastic. It's a great movement, and hopefully that will help to slow down our impacts on the planet. But the climate crisis goes hand in hand with the biodiversity crisis. And what we're not seeing is governments, organizations standing up and saying that we need to protect the areas that we have left so that those populations that are struggling can start to recover. And so what I'd love to see this week is a push towards the 30 by 30 agreement to make sure that we start protecting the areas that many of these animals need.
Are you finding that you have enough platforms? I mean, this is a platform that we want to amplify your message, of course, but what do you need in terms of reach?
we need people to share the message. We need people to go out and start talking about it. It's great to see the discussions in Davos, but we need those to go beyond Davos, and we need business leaders to stand up and start, especially in the current political situation, to actually stand up and start making these changes. There's a business case to prevent climate change. Climate change is going to make business much riskier, but at the same time, if we carry on destroying habitats, we're only going to see more pandemics with other diseases popping out. So we need to start protecting our natural resources as well. After all, half of global GDP is reliant on nature.
So basically, every CEO of a major company should have a scientist as an advisor, and bring the person on their when they go over their entourage.
That would be fantastic, and a chief ecological officer as well as a chief sustainability officer.
Bring the person on stage.
Yeah.
Huh?
It's the training that ecologists get mean that you can see things in nature that many people don't see. I can look out across Davos and you see these beautiful mountains, but you can also see where trees have been felled or trees aren't struggling. You can see some animal tracks, but maybe not as many as you would expect because of the disturbance they have. Ecologists have a very different way of looking at the planet that a lot of people don't have that training, and so it's great to be able to share that with people and help them understand the way that the planet's struggling.
Thank you very much. So, Mariah, from your perspective, what are we facing now in the coming year?
Yeah, what I've seen today and for the week at Davos is that we need to think globally but act locally. So a lot of communities already know and are very much aware of what's happening, whether it's diseases or interpersonal violence. But we need to, again, de-silo it, just used to be my word of the day, to really cross culture, the climate science and public health, to really think about how can we be talking to each other more, because we know what's happening with the animals. I know what's happening with the communities, but how do we make sure that policymakers and other people can be invited into this work to move it forward? Because otherwise we're just kind of talking into our own communities, but then it's not going anywhere and pushing the needle forward.
Well, you need to be able to reach the hearts of people that I understand in communications, not just the minds. And of course, going back to the beautiful big animals and also the health aspects of what's closer to yourself, my kids' health. How could you sort of maybe use is a bad framing of it, but how could you access the hearts of the people to also reach all the way up to their minds and give traction by pushing these emotional buttons?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's possible. I think if we lead with sympathy and understanding what communities need first, because they know what they need. So we need to be calling in indigenous communities, people who are marginalized, and asking, what do you need? What are the problems you're facing? And then thinking about how do we take it a step further and thinking about policy or thinking about structures and systems and take it from there. Listening to communities needs to be stressed and underscored there.
Thank you, Mariah. So what is the role of media here? I mean, we're a media company. We're doing our best in this field. Specifically, we're focusing on climate all the time. So what is the role of media, and how can media be utilized in a better way for science to reach the hearts and the minds of leaders and people in general? James.
I think media's role here is to speak science to power. That's our tagline for us here at Arctic Basecamp.
Speak science to power.
Speak science to power.
That's good.
We know the underlying science. It's irrefutable. We know the things that we need to do to transition away from a carbon-based economy. And it's great to see businesses talking about this week and businesses showing. We had a great chat this morning from the CEO of IKEA, showing that actually they can increase profits while decarbonizing.
I was there too. It was brilliant.
So we know we can do it. But what we need to do is to hold those businesses that are slow to move to account. And so that, I think, is media's role, is to make sure that everyone is on the same journey and everyone is pushing forward to see this change.
Thank you. Mariah.
I would say keep inviting people to the table. There are a lot of unlikely suspects in this field. Public health may not be something that people associate with climate science, but just thinking about who's contributing to the work, maybe indirectly, but could have some value add to strengthen the message. I also think of things like social work or other health science things that are seeing the impacts of what you're talking about, James, in their communities as well and in their patients. So I think it's just reaching the audience a little bit wider and thinking about other disciplines that are also seeing the impacts of climate.
Media is one player, activists is another player. In my country, in Sweden, we have the global movement Mothers Rebellion was founded by a psychologist, and the rebel moms that they're called in Sweden, they've been staging sit-downs with the health authorities to enhance the awareness of the governmental institutions talking about public health to also incorporate climate. And it's been a very slow push. I mean, hard push, but it was difficult. But now finally there are some people working in this part of the government that are incorporating and started to think about these policy changes. And maybe we should actually inform the public about the connection between climate and public health.
Yeah, and that's just a great example of, again, thinking about community. They know what they need, and pushing those voices to the forefront and letting them have that platform. That's awesome.
It's a good story. Let's talk about something that might not be so positive, but we need to keep it in mind. And of course, many conversations in Davos has been centered around, or at least touching upon the fact that we have an entirely new focus from the president of one of the larger companies. It's a company in his mind, actually, so it's a Freudian slip. One of the larger countries that might be run like a company, United States, due to Trump. So he's already had left his executive order to leave the Paris Agreement, and also, of course, is focusing on more drilling of oil and gas. Drill, baby, drill. We all have heard that sentence too many times by now. So, how do we, as climate people, very concerned? You work in the field of science. So, how do you face this? How do you address this fact that there is this big country that is really crucial in terms of emissions and policies that might veer in the wrong direction? Mariah, you're from Alaska, so it's your country.
I am. I'm thinking, and the first thing that came to my mind when you're asking is that I'm reminded that public health is purple. We need both sides to really be a part of the conversation, and I think it's really easy.
Purple as in not being. It's not. You're not Democrat. Right. Or you have to be neutral.
Yes, and listening to both sides and making sure that we're including everyone, because that's how we shut down. That's how we stop listening to each other. And public health is too critical to do that. We can't do that. We have to have everyone there. And I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it's not a matter of partisan politics. We have to be able to be inclusive to everyone.
But at the same time, you need to be able to adapt to, or maybe put up resistance towards changes that might happen, right?
Yeah, and I think there was a session today that even talked about you have to speak someone's language, and thinking about how they're thinking about
speak science to truth. What would you say? Science to power. Science to power, of course. Sorry, I interrupted you, Mariah.
It's okay. It's just thinking about what other people's priorities might be and keeping that in the forefront of your own communications and thinking about how can we find our own middle ground.
Thank you, Mariah. James, what is your take on this?
I think it's really easy in the current climate to become polarized.
It's easy?
Easy to become polarized in the current climate.
This is really easy. I said, not to my knowledge, no.
I think it's really easy to become polarized, to put up walls and become siloed. But nature influences all. It doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you will remember childhood experiences of spending time in nature, or maybe adult experiences spending time in nature. It's a great healer for ourselves, but it's a great healer for the planet too. I don't think it needs to be a political issue to say that we need to protect nature. If we know that by destroying ecosystems will unleash new pandemics, that shouldn't be a political issue, that's a public health issue. If we know that planting trees will help to reduce carbon dioxide or make our cities better places to live in with less children dying, that's not a political issue, that's a social issue. So it is really hard to have those conversations. It is really difficult to stand up and talk to somebody who has a completely different idea of the world to you. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have those conversations, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't bring people together to try and make positive change.
Thank you. This morning, if we went to the same event, I think we did, you also listened to Bertrand Piccard. It's a Solar Impulse Foundation leader, and also he's a doctor of psychiatry. And he said, if you can't reach the people you can't reach with, science and the need to protect the future for our children, you need to speak a different language. And he said, let's not talk about decarbonization, let's talk about modernization. I was like, oh, this is interesting, because who doesn't want to be modern? Who nobody wants to be sort of on the back foot here and be old school and not following suit of the technologies that might save us. So what did you heard this, obviously, James?
Yeah.
So how was your response? Because I thought that was kind of interesting.
It's great. It's, one of the largest sources of carbon emissions is household heating in the UK. And it's not it would be quite straightforward to start transitioning houses away from burning fossil
More
fuels.
modern, yeah.
So we should just do it. We should make our houses more efficient. That's, again, a thing that improves people's lives, but at the same time helps tackle the climate crisis. I don't understand why those things aren't happening faster.
And there are many more examples, actually, that goes in line with that rhetoric of being modern instead of focusing on decarbonization, which, of course, is the objective here, deep down. So a final question to you is, and it's a difficult one, but we've been sort of hovering around it, is how do we get more leaders in all fields to listen to you? How do we? I mean, what else? How can we help? How can all the people watching this broadcast, it's like, refer to science, back you up, donate? What can we do? Because I mean, we are depending on the policymakers and the business leaders listening to you. So how do we support you, James?
During the Brexit referendum, there was a classic quote from the Leave Party that they've had enough of experts. And that's a great way of dismissing an entire community. Scientists are the ones that are, if you like, at the coalface. They're the ones that are trying their best to try and understand the way things are working. And what we need is scientists that are able to then translate their understanding to the public. In preparing for coming to Davos, I was spending a lot of time thinking about how I was going to phrase things. And it's really easy to go into using your own native language, your own specialist language. And that's a great way of alienating people. So we need scientists who can speak plainly, and we need media organizations to help those scientists to translate that to the people that are going to listen and the people that are going to actually make those changes. But
also support science, right? I mean, you had to say that. I mean, if you didn't say it, I had to say it.
Yeah.
Because there are many ways of donating to organizations that, that might not be science organization, but they're organizations that need science, like WWF and Greenpeace and all sorts of wonderful entities, right?
Yeah.
So, Mariah.
Yeah, I kind of want to pick up the funding bit. Public health will never complain about more funding for research, just putting it out there. But I think just staying curious and staying on the grounds to what matters in the community, what matters to your neighbor, your brother, your sister, your kids, what's happening on the ground, and thinking about the priorities there and moving that forward. Because I think it's really easy as a researcher to call out the problems. Oh, the data is saying this, so this is the problem. Well, if the community doesn't feel a connection to that, or there's no relevance there, it's not going to matter. And that's how we start staying in these silos, and that's how we're not getting our message out. So really staying community focused and acting locally.
I have one final question, because it came to mind when you just spoke. Education. The importance of education, all the way down from the little toddlers to the seniors that are still lifelong education on that trajectory. So, what is the importance of, and how do we get in more climate related, public health, climate related, and climate research into education?
You can't protect something that you don't know.
Exactly.
And we have a massive disconnect, especially in the UK at the moment, between children and nature. The way that society has evolved over the last 40 or so years means that parents are now scared to let their children go out and play. And so today's generation don't have the same memories of just riding around in the local woods.
Instead.
They have screens.
These instead of trees.
And we send our daughter to an outdoor nursery. And that way she spends time in nature every day. And the number of friends that I have that say, you can't put your child outside in Scotland. What about in winter? I'm like, well, we just put more clothes on her. It's not that cold. But it means that at 5, she can identify trees. She can identify birdsong. She has this understanding of nature and these foundational happy memories of spending time in nature that I hope will seed a long life passion for nature that will help her to protect it in the future.
Thank you for pointing this out. This is important. Thank you. Mariah.
I didn't know she went to an outdoor
Yeah,
school.
yeah.
So does my son. How funny. I think it's just taking it step by step. Little pieces like that really can make a difference. And also thinking about how can we share local knowledge, indigenous knowledge. There is a lifetime of millennia of knowledge there, and tapping into that because they know the environment just as well as researchers do. So just reaching out and building those bridges where we can.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mariah and James, for coming to the Arctic Basecamp We Don't Have Time studio. We're happy to be sharing this wonderful space here in front of the Arctic Basecamp, and it felt like a very suitable scenery for you and your respective roles. So best of luck with your continued work, and this has been a truly inspiring talk for me, from my side, to listen to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
And for all of you watching this, there is much more like this. You can watch this session. You can share it with your colleagues and your friends and maybe teachers in your schools to enhance this work. And you can also share stories, interact with the speakers and other experts on our platform, wedon'thavetime.org. So please join us in this quest and support these fantastic people that do their best to protect the future generations' life and livelihoods. Thank you very much. And this concludes this broadcast here today from the We Don't Have Time studio. And as you understand, we're an organization, We Don't Have Time, that is very dedicated to this cause of democratizing climate knowledge and spreading climate action. So again, please join us, and we'll see you again tomorrow, because we have another day of broadcasting here from the Schatzalp station in Davos. Thank you for joining us.